the next level, and I saw a crowd of people clustered around the bottom. And Blood of Luis is what reminded me of. And they cleared away, and I saw this girl, about 10 years old, and buried up to her forearm in the mechanism of the escalator. There was a lot of blood, and she was screaming. And I was staring at her for a while.
How would you talk about your work?
Okay, let's start with the X-rays. I've been collecting medical-based images since I was a kid, and I was always very much interested in anatomy and viscera when I was growing up. I actually learned to draw from copying from anatomy books and surgical books, and I used to draw them endlessly. It was a lot of, that's all how I used to spend my time. And over the process of collecting books and becoming interested in collage techniques, it was very interesting to see how things could mesh together and make intercombinations of various parts.
And that's evolved into the work that you're doing. How are you?
It's kind of an antecedent. It's kind of hard to speak about it off the cuff, but more Needs and Acts, for example, was partially evolved out of doing a lot of negative printing meaning you either print from slides or you reverse the normal filtration or appearance of the film in some manner from the film to the printing stage. I've been doing that. I started out becoming very intrigued by using negative printing, kind of like if you look at the reversals that happened in some early film, like in Dracula, the first version of Dracula, where there's the scene running through the forest and they reverse the film. It has this very otherworldly quality to it. It makes everything unfamiliar, makes everything nondescript, but oddly familiar in some way. And I thought that by employing different strategies of contrasting films, of a wide color range and the palette of the colors that I was working with, and coming from a specific base of subject matter and the realm of body metaphors, would be very interesting. Needs and Acts came out of some part of that from a technical point of view, and it also was influenced by the work that I was preoccupied with in graphs and illusions and the X-ray work I've been doing all along, off and on, for a long time, as first photograms, both black and white and Cibachrome, and then I just started actually using the X-rays as objects and using them in installations with light boxes on windows, and just the look about them, the glow that they had was absolutely captivating, because there's nothing quite so intimate as an X-ray. You can't hide anything in it. It tells you everything. It's a lot more revealing than most photographs, I think, and so it's always been rich for me. And that and its various Röntgen-based offshoots.
You may want to explain who Röntgen is.
Wilhelm Röntgen, inventor of the X-ray. Various things, tomography, magnetic resonance imaging, fluoroscopes, and so on. It's always seeing through matter. It's always being able to look through something solid, getting at something that you can't normally, forcibly, by bombardment with certain kinds of radiation, and manipulating it. And a lot of the ideas in history that are bound up with so-called mechanized processes of photography, they're supposed to be non-plastic, they're not not supposed to be malleable. They're supposed to be straight, objective, cold, machined. I think is obviously fertile ground. It's proven to be fertile ground for a lot of that medium's history, certainly through the history of film. And I was intrigued by that, how that could be combined in some of the subject matter that I've chosen. And that is a really circuitous and not very well tied together rambling sentence. So that is not something I'm terribly pleased with, but we'll let it go for now. You were saying? Come up with something, Lori. I know you're hungover. Nosed undergraduates, and I'm on. I can turn a lot of cynical little assholes into laughing little.
Picture those snot-nosed kids in front of you.
It doesn't really go beyond what you're saying. I don't really get what you're getting at. You know, that sort of shit. Oh, she's getting me. I deserve it. This is what hell's gonna be like.
That?
It's gonna be glass.
Wait, were those the kids or was that you?
That was, you know, doing a lot of lectures in the West, it's like you're always being dumped into people that are there because the teachers make them be there, you know. It's like so they get credit for the class or some garbage like that. So you're force feeding. Sometimes it's happened when I've shown the work of other artists that I've found compelling in some ways, from all over the spectrum, not in photography necessarily, but I mean it could be, you know, showing a film, like snippets of Tarkovsky or something. It's like, why are we watching this?
So what do you do to get them interested?
Basically, you keep looking for comparison similes that would be able to be easily translated. It's sort of like slipping a vitamin into a dog's dish. And you have to do it because people become suspicious.
So what are some of the ways that you've gotten these kids interested in what you're talking about?
Well, by basically using the guts and the strategies of, say for instance, montage or something like that, what you do is you mimic the language in a lot of cases of the pop culture, which in turn is the product of a much greater historical chain of cross-pollination between the quote-unquote modernist fine art pantheon and the world of commercial illustration, various forms of the televised and film media, for instance. It goes back to as far back as you'd like to think about caricatures, drawing parallels that people can relate to. It's a friend of mine used to teach English in Japan, and one of her techniques, for example, was very simple, of just copying lyrics from the popular bands that sang in English over there and getting that to translate to people that are trying to learn a language, or if you want to teach someone to speak Spanish and they have a proclivity towards songs that are in Spanish, you do translations in that way. That's a really simplistic example.
Have you ever shown your own work to your students?
Oh, all the time. They should know where the person who's imparting things should, that person's coming from. But it's not just when I've taught, it's when people have invited me to speak or give lectures or whatever. I generally try to start with historical suggestions, touchstones, points of departure, and to try to say, well, it might not seem like there's a connection between example X and example Z, and it may well not appear that this is what the world looks like by any means, but I think on a certain level it is. And a lot of what I do, these little fragments, these little pieces that I'm putting
occasionally fruitful reconnections, and the various ways of trying to find common junctures between subject matter, between colors, between images.
Can you expand on that idea via the process and the people that you end up researching, like the doctor's notes from the late 19th century? Or
Oh yeah, Let Either Side Confess. That was something that just came into. I was collecting. I'd gone to a lot of antique auctions, and I was purchasing a lot of old medical texts and scientific books from the 19th century. And along the way, I would end up with correspondence from doctors and various notes. And around the same time, I had come into possession of a large quantity of magnetic resonance images. And the idea of layers and layerings was very Gramercy Park. The idea of layers being removed and put on and torn away and replaced, the notion of skin and wrapping and punching through that, translucence, opacity, transparency, in an image, in a single image, it was very gripping. And since I'd been doing photograms since I was in college, before college actually, and just part of taking a few simple elements and doing them over and over and over, there was something in the process that just really invigorated me. It was a way of paper fibers enlarged, colored, reversed, flipped, blended in with the various grain structures, the emulsions that I was using, and the way that certain details would break up, the way it would be developed, the way it would be projected. Combining those was just this thing I ended up with. And Let Either Side Confess, that diptych, and a few of the others, taking dissimilar textual examples from the same physiological canon, if you will. The very beginning of the X-ray as a medical tool in 1895, which is when these doctor's notes were written, and the MRI, which was made, I think, around 1990, this particular example that I had, and putting those two together was very compelling. There were sort of bookends of a century's worth of accumulated imaged data of an area where we're, as with neurology, as with forms of psychology, as with a lot of things, we have, at times, a very limited knowledge of what we're poking around in, and it has a lot of trapdoors in it. And being able to see through these things was very compelling. It was very fascinating.
how does your knowledge of medical history and historical perspective over the last 150 years tie into your work presently, and how does that tie into other work that's similar to yours that is just dealing with here and now
Right.
looks of technology?
1996. First off, it's the I'm fascinated from the perspective of power and the enormous amount of power that individuals in certain disciplines. This is a point Silverthorne brought up to me a long time ago, speaking about something different. But the enormous amount of power that certain persons in certain fields have over many people. I mean, when you're being operated on, for example, you're helpless. You're at the mercy of someone who's got the power to kill you. I mean, that's very it's a quaint little conundrum. One contradiction that I've always found amazing is that X-rays, to cure you, they have to kill you. If you get a certain amount of rads, you will get cancer. There's no two ways about it, eventually. So, and when people first started fooling around with the inventions of Röntgen, they began developing physiological problems because they had no idea what they were doing. The X-rays stood for the unknown. They called it the X-ray because they didn't fully understand its properties, but they went right about using it, utilizing its various capacities as quickly as they could without any even slightest inkling of what some of the consequences of that would be. Early medical history is littered with standard operating procedures and their outcomes. Persons testing exposure levels by sticking their hand in front of the ray beam every day, to test exposures, and dying of cancer soon after, or other related horrors that these people would suffer as a result of this exposure. And to bring this back to the work that interests me is this irony of the power that someone with a lens, because an X-ray is a camera, at least the way that it is used in medical fields, it is part of a transformational imaging mechanical device. It's a very specialized kind of camera, and radiologists are part cameramen. I mean, they're also physiologists and scientists in a way, and anatomists, but they're also cameramen. And they, in a very odd way, take multi-layered composites, cross-sections of the human body, or the inside of chemical drums, or the layers of circuit boards, or whatever application you can think of.
Going through the airport.
Oh,
What-
great. Off to LaGuardia.
Why do you choose to use an 8x10, or how does the process of using a large format camera parallel or hook up with the other processes that you're familiar with?
Well, you just get tired of working small after a while. It's the standard axiom is why pay more money to take less pictures, but part of it is certainly the detail and the richness of color and the tonal complexity and the density and so on and so forth, but really it's a chance to be able to concentrate on every aspect of what you're doing without having to worry about a lot of the inconsequential things. So much of the editing is done in process that, you can see what's going to happen before you really do it. There's a certain performative or staged aspect to what you're doing with a view camera. And many things that you can do with a view camera that you can't do in any other way, just as using a small format camera or a video camera can do things that a large format camera can't. Each tool is designed for different uses. I like scrutinizing things. I like taking multiple views of things with as much clarity as possible. And I like the potential, which doesn't always have to be utilized, of cramming as much information into a picture as possible, and information that may not be readily available, stuff that you might not be able to see until a long time later. The Let Either Side Confess, or some of the other montages that incorporate the X-rays and the forensic texts, there's lots of buried words in them. There's words that jump out, elliptical sentences, half sentences, switches of words, stuff that's been influenced by skip reading. I like skip reading a lot. A lot of the stuff that I used to look at in Fred Sommer's writing happenstance connections of words. They're all things that I looked at that in some way were encapsulated in graphs and elisions, for example.
Your arm's falling. Wait a minute. Your arm's falling?
No, I just have to go.
Okay. Put it on pause then.
No, we can keep on going. Where were you?
Well, in graphs and elisions, what kept me going was not looking at pictures of people that were, graffitied or defaced or something, because you see that everywhere, but it was the accidental wounding, the absolutely happenstance connection of word and image, where you see the half sentences and garbled words of something on the text underneath an image that had been hacked out. That was a dynamic that caught my attention the most. It had the most possibility of multivalent associations, different layers of meaning, different layers of evidence that could be interpreted in a lot of different ways. And that was where I wanted to go beyond what was happening with this sort of, what I said about, looking at books as making assumptions about why they're hacked up and why they're not. I was more interested in this whole thing about damage, regeneration, located as a site on the human body, and the human body is this template for limitless textual bodies. And that's about as imprecise as I can get. It's gonna sound real half-assed and pretentious, but I can do better. If I've got a computer in front of me, I can type it all out. It'll be a lot easier.
But here we're sitting, so.
Here we're sitting, so
No computer, just keep on spewing.
you get what you get.
Well, as far as what,
5 minutes later, yeah, Gary came down again. I thought he was full of shit, but...
do you think you're gonna change mediums ever? Do you think you'll outgrow
It
photography?
seems like it's endless for you.
I'd like to, consider painting with collages. In other words, incorporating large-scale collages with easel painting. That's something that I find to be very intriguing. And to be able to eventually do the kind of installations that I want to do without violating fire codes, which happens a lot.
So in the installations, do you work into the space, or?
Yeah, and usually you end up having to shoehorn an idea into an inadequate room.
What type of materials?
Usually reflective and projected items, stuff that I burn. Usually what happens is I've done work where I've had burned pieces that the smell is overpowering and there's no ventilation or what have you. But photography is... I understand these quaint little late 70s definitions, and the junctures came in the postmodernist association, where we have to distinguish the practitioners using photography from the Westons of the world, and so on and so forth, and pictures that mean something as opposed to pictures that look good. This supposed form versus content dichotomy. If you call it conceptual art, that's fine. If you call it photography, that's fine. The obsession with marketing strategies is not something that is the first thing that comes into my head. I would like to be able to expand the idea of photography beyond just a simple act of picture making, but an act of reworking an image that may not need a camera, may not need anything. It's the image. I use photography as a means to get images, if that makes any sense. I love film. I've made films. I've made a couple of videos. And I would like to go back and make better ones than those. Make things that are more coherent and less inexact.
Do you see any difference between your pieces that are what I've been talking about as being just one or two elements on a format
The figure fields and
versus
the photograms.
versus your works which have an infinitesimal amount of imagery, layers, and pieces and parts all over the field? Do you see a difference in that in your process, or is that?
Partially, it was. There's times where I've wanted to just make. It was a challenge to make really interesting, to me, compositions that only had one or two elements in them, and to try and find a balance within the picture plane. That was very difficult. It was very easy for me to cram an immense amount of information into a photograph, and to be able to just kind of treat the ocular path of a presumed viewer as they're gazing at a picture within a frame, and treat it like a pinball. That's very easy, where someone's eye is going. That's very easy. Making something work that's only got one element in it is almost impossible. So, the idea of those photograms, there's stuff in there, there's just as much information in there, it's just a different kind of information. It's a little more ambient, it's a lot more buried. It's not quite so linear, but it's the same sort of desire, but a different formal strategy, a different process. The layering, I want to be just as dense, and I want there to be something just as arresting and just as compelling and just as captivating. But seeing, this little X-rayed hand with no caption or anything, just sort of floating there, isolated, very stark, but yet you see the paper fibers, you see the different colors, you see the ink, you see these tiny little subtleties, and when you blow them up, they become violent in their clarity. That's really, really attractive. That you don't get from some of the other forms.
How does color play into all this? I mean,
A lot.
you manipulate color. You seem to be an exquisite colorist, but you never really talk about color as a formal issue. It seems more of a conceptual.
It comes into bear more of as it's just there.
Do you realize how well you manipulate it, or is it a conceptual, do you see it as a conceptual tool where you know that the colors symbolize certain things, or you just say this works together?
I have a vague idea of what colors symbolize, but I'm a lot more into, I've read Josef Albers, and I know but I don't get up in the morning and say, well, I'm going to make a split complementary color composition that will have this, have a blotch here and this, that, and there. It's just trying to see what works and what doesn't, and it's more through empirical method than anything else. It's just trial and error, and after a while you just see what works and what doesn't. And I throw out a lot of stuff because sometimes the only thing going for the picture is the color, and that's not enough, so out it goes. A lot of times.
So it is a secondary element for you then.
Yeah. Or maybe not secondary, it's just something that comes with the territory. Sometimes, if you're out to just make a pretty picture and that's all you've got, out it goes into the dumpster. So there were other things there that were happening in the process of making a lot of the color pieces that usually when you see something that's garish and vibrant and phosphorescent, it is meant to connote a glitz, a sheen. In other words, it's using the color to sell something that ordinarily wouldn't catch your eye. And I'm interested in the possibilities of perhaps using vibrant color as a way of concealing things, concealing defects, using that strategy like a used car salesman. But instead of, having a clutch that goes out on you, you could have some very interesting evidence about some event, about a relationship between two people, an elegy over someone that's died, a testament that someone has made, handwriting by someone who discovered a cure for a disease that no longer exists, that sort of thing. Or an unsent letter that could have changed the path of somebody's life that, I'll clip out a corner of it and stick it into an internegative and make a montage out of that.
Are you close enough? Can you get all the shit in the background?
Yeah.
So what do you want me to say? What are you thinking of talking about? You want me to talk about an image?
Alright, Gar, we're at Sodom by the Sea. How does that...
I've never been sodomized here, but
How does
it's
that
only the first time.
How does that relate to your new body of work?
Body's a good word. I'm hoping that I can make something as beautiful as the roller coasters here. Something that just looks hollowed out. Something skeletal. Something that is picked clean. When I'm taking pictures, performing a bit constructed, there's something that happens. There's something when you're projecting and using reflected art, combining the various contours of a given shape, could be a human body, could be the edge of a car, could be something, connecting them together is not purely visual contours, it's needs an axe. Announces itself as nice exercise. It got me going. You want me to talk louder?
Yeah.
Awesome. That was a picture that I was considering as sort of a doubled radical C-section. We've got this architected, surgically altered silicone fashion model imprinted upon a very different kind of C-section, a man who had committed suicide by slicing himself in half in a bandsaw and taking the forensic source material and blending that with, your pop culture sort of glycerin-coated adaptation of what an ideal is supposed to be with something very gritty. I thought if I could harness some of the pathological instincts and strategies and the anger that was evidenced in some of the stuff that I was finding in the libraries, and did kind of a mimicry, almost of a mocking of the poor little loners, assuming tells you a great deal. My assumptions say a lot about
to mimic these sort of Bundy-esque actions, these Chakra-esque actions against violence, against images as totems for violence against people, violence against women. I thought the result could be very powerful. I thought the result could have a lot of potential for a wide range of associations and dealing with the paper and the film and the acetates and the mylars and the diazos and the internet film and I was getting access to at the time I moved there was really liberating. There was something about when I made that picture